Hi, friends. I just wanted you to know that anytime you have a question that you'd like me to explore on the podcast, anything around nervous system healing, relationships, or generational patterns, you can now submit it anonymously through the link in the show notes. You don't have to share any personal information unless you choose to. There's also an option to consent to be featured in a future episode for a short audio coaching conversation. If you check that box, I or someone from my team will reach out to schedule a time that feels good for you. I'd love to hear what's on your heart. Welcome to the NeuroHeir Podcast, the show for cycle breakers, parents, young adults, and helping professionals ready to understand their nervous system through a generational lens, heal what isn't theirs to carry, and consciously choose what comes next. Hi, I'm your host, Leanna Hunt, an associate clinical mental health counselor and certified performance coach. Each week, you'll get stories, science, and somatic practices, plus my signature 4N framework: notice, name, nurture, and navigate, to help you honor resilience, break silence, and build deeper connection with yourself and those you love, all while shaping a legacy of safety, freedom, and possibility. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the NeuroHeir Podcast. Last week, I sat down with my favorite person in the whole world, my husband, David, and we talked about attachment styles and how they can show up in our relationships. And if you haven't listened to that conversation yet, you might want to go back and listen, because today I want to continue it by asking this question: what might be happening underneath our attachment patterns? And more specifically, what happens when we begin looking at attachment through the lens of the nervous system? Because maybe you listened to our conversation and thought, oh, I'm anxious, or yep, that's my husband, he's the avoidant one. Or maybe you immediately started labeling everyone's attachment style in your family, which, by the way, is very easy to do once you start to learn this stuff. But I also want to be careful here, because I never want attachment language to become another box we put ourselves in or the people we love. Does that make sense? I don't want I'm anxiously attached, I'm avoidant, I'm disorganized to become another version of this is just who I am. Because attachment patterns are not character flaws, and they are not a destiny. They can give us language for understanding some of the strategies that we've developed around closeness, around separation, around conflict, around vulnerability, support, and around connection. And so today, I want to explore what some of the research tells us about what happens when those attachment systems become activated. Because sometimes the question isn't simply, why am I acting like this? A more compassionate question might be, what is my system trying to accomplish or let me know right now? And then, is this still the response that I want to choose? Before we get into the nervous system, let's back up for just a minute. If you've explored attachment styles before, you may have read the book Attached, which, by the way, is such a great read. David and I actually read it together, and I'll link it in the show notes for you guys. I recommend it often to my clients who are dating or moving into serious relationships. In fact, before our daughter, our oldest, got married, this was the book I recommended she and her boyfriend read when he asked for her hand in marriage. So it's never too late to learn about attachment styles if you have adult children, whether they're married or not. And for yourself, highly, highly recommend diving into the book Attached. Okay, so clearly I'm a fan, but attachment theory goes back way further than the book Attached, and definitely much further than all of the attachment style conversations we see on Instagram today. This work goes back decades. So there was British psychiatrist John Bowlby. We learned about him a lot in graduate school. He began developing attachment theory in the mid-20th century. He was interested in the importance of the relationship between children and their caregivers, and proposed that human beings have an attachment system that helps motivate us to seek proximity to important attachment figures, particularly during times of fear or distress. And then there's Mary Ainsworth, also a big name that we learned about in school, later expanded this work through observational research, including what became known as the strange situation. And you guys might not know it as a strange situation, but as I describe it, you might have heard about it. So basically, researchers observed how young children responded when a caregiver left and then returned. You can also find videos on YouTube if you want to watch it. And out of this work came recognizable patterns of attachment. And decades later, researchers began applying attachment theory to adult romantic relationships as well. So I think it's important to understand that attachment theory wasn't originally created as a quote unquote personality quiz. Even though in the book Attached, there are quizzes that are very helpful. But at its core, attachment theory has always been connected to something incredibly human. What happens when we need connection? And also, what happens when that connection feels uncertain? What have we learned to expect from the people we depend on? And what do we do when we feel distressed? And this is where this can become really interesting from a nervous system perspective. And before we go any further, I also want to make this important distinction. Attachment styles and nervous system survival states are not considered the same thing. And mostly on the podcast, we've talked about nervous system survival states. So I don't want us to oversimplify and say anxious attachment must equal fight or flight, and avoidant attachment equals freeze, or disorganized attachment equals this particular nervous system state. Human beings are much more complex than that. So today we're going to try to really look at the attachment style language, and I will connect it back to the nervous system. And both attachment theory and autonomic nervous system models are different frameworks. But research can show us, and it does, that attachment orientation is associated with how we regulate our emotions, how we respond during relational stress, how we seek or avoid support. And in some research, we can see that it also shows up with differences in our physiological responses. So rather than trying to force these frameworks on top of one another, I think we can become curious about where they interact. Such as answering the question, what happens in my body when connection feels threatened? What does my nervous system predict is about to happen? And what strategy have I learned to use when it does? Most of us, whether we realize it or not, you guys, we all have strategies for what we do. Our system, again, is always preparing way ahead of time, assessing safety. So we're going to talk more about that today, maybe even think about, I wonder what strategies my body operates on. And sometimes you might be really aware, and other times it might be things like today where you're listening to me and you're like, I wonder about my strategies. So we will talk about that too. But this is where I found some of the attachment research really fascinating and helpful. So researchers Mario, if I can say the last name, Miku Linzer, and Philip Shaver have written extensively about attachment and emotional regulation. And again, all the studies, as I always share, will be in the show notes. And I added links. You guys can just click on the link, go right to the study and read about it if you want to. So these researchers describe strategies associated with attachment insecurity using two terms I think are really helpful. The first is hyperactivation, and the second is deactivation. And when I first read those words in this research, I immediately thought about the conversation David and I just had last week on the podcast. Because if you listened last week, you heard David talk about leaning more towards anxious attachment and that I tend to lean more avoidant. And suddenly, some of the patterns that we've experienced throughout our marriage, once we learned this and the language around it, started to make a whole lot of sense to us. So for someone leaning more toward anxious attachment like David, uncertainty in the relationship may activate strategies that essentially say, hey, come closer to me. Let's make sure we're okay. Check the relationship. Look for reassurance. Pay attention to the distance. Fix it before we can do anything else, and reconnect. And for someone like me that leans more avoidant, distress around connection may activate a very different strategy. And we talked about that last week. So for avoidant, it might be, I need to create more space. I need to handle this myself. I need to step away from the intensity. I want to maintain my own independence. And I want to also be careful here because I'm simplifying a very large body of research into conversational language. Not every anxiously attached person does all these things, and not every avoidantly attached person does the opposite. But I think this might help give you guys a good starting point. And people too, we all can respond differently depending on the relationship and the situation. But these broad patterns of hyperactivation and deactivation give us an incredibly helpful way of understanding what's happening underneath some of our behavior. So let's bring this into a real relationship. Let's bring that into mine and David's. I think we've been open enough, and actually just got a text message from a family member that's thanked us for our openness in our conversation that we just put out. So I'm going to use David and I as an example. Imagine that David and I have a conflict. Yes, we've healed a lot, but we still have conflict. David senses distance between us. His strategy might essentially say, come closer so I know we're okay. Meanwhile, I sense increased emotional intensity. And my more avoidant strategy might tell me, give me space so that I know I'm okay. And do you see what can happen? David senses distance and moves towards me, and I experience the movement towards me as more intensity, and I push back or I push away so I can have more space. He experiences my space as even more distance, so he moves closer. And I experience his pursuit as more intensity, so I pull away farther. And suddenly we're stuck in a loop. And neither one of us necessarily intended to create this loop that we get stuck in. And this is one of the things I hope you can take from today's episode, because neither person has to be the villain for a cycle to exist. Sometimes it's two protective strategies that bump or often collide into each other. One person is essentially saying, come closer so I can know and I can feel that we're okay. So then I can move on. And the other person is saying, give me space so I know we're okay. And underneath both of these strategies, I truly believe may be the desire for something very similar, which is safety within connection. We just learned different ways of trying to find it, often based on our childhood. There's another study I want to tell you about because I think this is where the conversation can become even more relevant to real relationships. So there's researchers, Jeffrey Simpson and Stephen Rolls, that reviewed research examining adult attachment, stress, and romantic relationships. And one of the important ideas in this research is that attachment differences can become especially visible under stress. And doesn't that make sense? You may not notice your attachment strategy when everything feels wonderful, when there haven't been arguments, there haven't been things that need to be discussed. David and I can be walking on the beach like we were last week, holding hands, laughing. Neither of us are working. We're on vacation. Everything feels connected. And neither of us is thinking, my attachment system seems very regulated today. But it's often when something changes that's when we start to notice the pattern. It's usually one person in the relationship gets more quiet. Maybe somebody walks away. Someone else's tone might be changing. Someone's maybe making an assumption about the other person's body language. Maybe it's a text isn't answered. Someone wants more closeness than the other person is comfortable with. And maybe someone needs more space than we're comfortable with. And there's conflict, there's uncertainty, there's separation, there's stress. And suddenly the strategies we've learned can become much more visible. And Simpson and Rolls describe adult attachment anxiety and avoidance as being associated with different patterns of emotion regulation when people encounter threatening or distressing situations. And this matters because sometimes we know better cognitively, but our response happens incredibly quickly. And here's an example. You can have read the books. You can even know your attachment style. You can have gone to therapy. You can even understand more about how these attachment styles may have been modeled for you in your childhood. You can even know why your partner is pulling away and how that bothers you. And then they walk out of the room during an argument, and suddenly all of that knowledge can feel really, really far away. Or your partner wants to keep talking and everything inside you is screaming, like me, I need to get out of here. Where are the exits? And that's why I think this conversation belongs on a podcast about the nervous system, because understanding the story between you and your partner and your own stories really matters. But we also have to become curious about what happens inside us when that story gets activated. And there's another piece of research I want to share because I think this one helps connect all of this back to the nervous system. In 2015, there was a review by Gander and Bushheim that looked at attachment research alongside what was actually happening in the body during stress. Researchers weren't only asking people what they were thinking or feeling. Some of the studies were looking at things like heart rate, stress hormones, and other physiological responses. And no, this doesn't mean we can just check our heart rate and say, yep, you're definitely avoidant. That's not how it works. But it does remind us that our attachment responses aren't necessarily happening only in our thoughts. Or for me, as I would say, maybe in just one part of our brain. Our bodies can be part of the responses too. And I think that this helps explain something so many of us have experienced. It can be that I know I'm safe, so why does this feel so intense in my body right now? Like maybe intellectually, you know your husband needing space doesn't mean he's leaving you. Maybe intellectually, I know David wanting connection doesn't mean that I'm trapped. But our bodies can respond before we've had time to quote unquote think our way through what's happening. Something feels familiar. Something in us says, oh, I've been here before. I know what's going to happen. And before we know it, that's when that familiar strategy shows up, such as move closer or get the reassurance or pull away completely. Maybe it's even shutting down, or it's just this sense of I've got to handle this myself before I can attempt repair. And this is also important. Just because my body is having a response doesn't necessarily mean it is making a prediction about this moment that is accurate. It may simply mean my system recognized something familiar and reached for a strategy it has used before. Remember, you guys, our brain is always going to take the path of least resistance. It is going to do the thing that is most practice. It is going to do the thing that we have used the most. And especially when we don't feel safe in our body, remember that logical part of the brain goes offline, that emotional part of the brain starts running the show, and it becomes really hard for us to be able to think our way out of anything at that point. So I want you guys to think about that. And instead, when this happens, especially when there's activation and in you and your partner, you're noticing you guys have different attachment styles, instead of asking like, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with my partner or why am I doing this again? Maybe we can become more curious. And the question I really like to sit with and have my clients sit with is something along the lines of, what did my system just recognize? And what is it trying to protect? Okay, so what do we do with all of this? Because I don't want you leaving this episode saying, great, I'm pretty sure I'm anxiously attached. Guess I'm doomed. Or I'm avoidant. Sorry, everybody. This is where I like to use my 4N framework to give us a real practical way to work with our attachment patterns. Not to get rid of them, but to begin creating a little more space between the automatic strategy, again, the strategy that is used the most and the most familiar, and what we want to choose next. So if we look at the first and notice, before we diagnose the other person, we got to notice ourselves. What happens inside of me when connection feels uncertain? I want you to think about that for a moment. What happens inside your body when connection with your partner feels unpredictable? Maybe someone pulls away or moves closer that feels comfortable. Maybe there's conflict and someone is disappointed in you, or you simply don't know if the two of you are okay. And don't only notice your thoughts, it's really important that we notice our body. Maybe your chest tightens. Maybe you notice that your stomach just feels really heavy, or you clench your jaw. Maybe you suddenly feel restless and anxious. And then notice what you feel pulled to do. Especially this is helpful in the moment or reflection after if you can't do it in the moment. Like maybe do you want to, as you notice, is it you want to text again? Do you want to explain more? Do you want to try and fix it? Maybe you're trying to get more reassurance from your partner, or maybe you just want to shut down completely or change the subject or leave the room or pick up your phone. These are the moments that we want to become more curious about. Can I notice the urge before automatically following it? For me, this might sound something along the lines of, interesting, I'm feeling the urge to create distance right now. And then as I notice that, I can sit with that. And if I couldn't do it in the moment, I can reflect back on the argument or the disagreement, and I can ask myself, when was it that I noticed the urge to create distance? And then when I'm ready, we can talk about it as a husband and wife. And so for my husband, David, it might be, I'm noticing that I really want reassurance that we're okay. That's it. We're just noticing. We're not trying to change it. We're not judging ourselves. We're just noticing what is happening inside us as we either think about it, as we notice it in the moment, or reflect on it after it happens. Okay, second is name. Then we name. This is where attachment language can actually become really useful. And again, not that I'm the avoidant person, so that's just what I'm going to do. But my avoidance strategy may be showing up right now. And it's not I'm needy. It's my attachment system feels activated and I am wanting reassurance. Does that make sense? And this language can be really important because one type of response can kind of make us feel like it's our identity, right? And maybe like we're doomed. And the other can allow us to observe a pattern. And observing those patterns helps us be able to do that deeper reflection. You might even name what the strategy seems to believe. And maybe it's a part of me believes that distance means something is wrong. Or a part of me believes I need to get away from this intensity. Or maybe it's my system is predicting that this conflict means disconnection. So we're creating language around the experience without turning that experience into who we are. And again, this reflection, you can think about it now and maybe reflect again on something that's happened in the past, but you might have to just kind of go through the next experience and then be able to reflect on it individually. And then if you want to share it with your partner, you guys can try to do it together. Number 3, nurture. This is such an important step because this is where I think we can easily jump straight into relationship problem solving. Have you ever tried to do that? Solve your partner's problems. Let's talk about this. Tell me we're okay. Give me space. Fix this. What can I do to make sure that this doesn't happen again for you? This is your problem. But sometimes, actually most of the time, our system needs support before we decide what the relationship needs. And David and I touched on this the last episode as well. Maybe you feel your feet on the floor or you orient to the room, which means orienting means noticing things in the space that feel supportive. We can use all our senses to orient. We can listen for things. We can intentionally put on music that we like that helps calm our system. We can touch things, different fabrics and textures. Some of my clients like crystals or grab their pet or a fuzzy blanket or pillow. Sometimes we want a really warm tea or a mint. Sometimes what we look at out the window, we want to look at something out the window or artwork. Smelling candles, essential oils, different things, all of that helps us orient and comes back to the present moment. Maybe you start taking slower breaths in and out of your nose. Or you place a hand over your chest or use some of the EFT tapping points we've talked about in previous sessions. Maybe it's just simply noticing the chair underneath you that supports your back. Or maybe you're able to sit and remind yourself, I am activated right now. I don't have to solve everything in this exact second, but I can be here with myself. Or maybe it's something along the lines of course this feels big. My system has learned something about moments like this. That doesn't mean your needs aren't real. It doesn't mean the other person's behavior is okay either. It simply gives you a little more capacity to determine what is actually happening right now instead of allowing the old strategy to make every decision. Because remember, the oldest, most familiar patterns are the things we do the most automatic. And then the last step is navigate. This is where we choose what the next moment actually needs. Maybe for David, he notices, I'm really wanting reassurance right now. Can I tolerate a little uncertainty without automatically assuming we're disconnected? And maybe I can notice, I'm really wanting to pull away. Can I stay present for another 30 seconds without feeling like that is abandoning myself? And sometimes navigate means communicating the need differently. So instead of me disappearing emotionally, maybe I can say, hey babe, I need a little space, but I'm not leaving this relationship. Can we come back to this in 20 minutes? Think about the new information that can offer my husband that has an anxious attachment style. Space, you guys, remember this, especially for those of you with the more anxious attachment. Space does not always mean abandonment. And maybe instead of David continuing to pursue the conversation when I'm overwhelmed and he knows I'm checking out, he can say, I want to talk about this because you matter to me and because I love you. We don't have to solve it this exact second. And what new information might that offer me? It might offer me the information that closeness doesn't always mean losing my autonomy. And this is where relationships can become places where we practice something new. And remember, as I said at the beginning, if you use the four N's, it might have to be as a reflection after the fact. And then the more you practice, the more reflection that you take with your own patterns and awareness, the quicker you will be able to implement it in the actual moment. Okay. And I want to say something I also feel is really important. I believe the goal of nervous system work is never becoming so perfectly self-regulated that we never need another human being. You guys remember, we are constantly in relationship. And I've talked about this so many times. And that's not secure attachment either, to never need someone. We are relational creatures. We need support. We need connection. But we also need boundaries. And we need repair. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is ask someone we love, can you sit with me? Because we also need that co-regulation too. We need to feel that safety in our other person, our partner. It might be saying, can you reassure me? Can I have a few minutes to just sit and breathe? Can we come back to this in 20 minutes? Could you just listen, please, without trying to fix it or me? And in this, questions like this, remember, the goal isn't to eliminate our needs. The goal is actually to increase our capacity to recognize what is happening and respond with more choice. And please, you guys, do not use this episode to go and diagnose your spouse, because attachment language can become another sophisticated way of blaming each other. You know, like we kind of said, or you're just the avoidant one, or you're anxiously attached, or you're dysregulated, or that's your trauma that's coming up right now. And these statements will not create safety. Instead, attachment language can give us another way to become curious, such as, what might their system be protecting right now? And equally important, what might mine be protecting? And also, understanding someone's protective strategy doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior either. Okay, you guys, if there is harmful behavior, that is a different conversation. But I do believe truly that for most of us, compassion and boundaries can exist together, and that repair is possible. I believe that understanding and accountability can also exist together. Remember the and. But understanding the pattern can sometimes help us stop fighting the person long enough to recognize the cycle. Because most of the time, the cycle is the problem, not the person. Let me say that again. I believe truly most of the time, the cycle is the problem and not the person. And maybe you're wondering too, can our attachment styles actually change? And this is one of the most hopeful things I think I found in my own work and also in some of the research. There is evidence that attachment can have stability over time. One long-term study followed a group of participants from infancy all the way into early adulthood. And the researchers first observed them at 12 months old using the Ainsworth strange situation, and then reconnected with 50 of them 20 years later. And they found something really interesting. About 72% received the same broad secure versus insecure attachment classification in early adulthood that they had received as infants. So there was definitely stability, but there was also change. And the researchers ended their abstract with a phrase that I absolutely love. They said, attachment security can remain stable across significant portions of our lives and yet remain open to revision in light of experience. You guys, I love that so much. One more time, open to revision in light of experience. Because I believe this holds two things at once. Our attachment patterns can become deeply established, and they aren't necessarily our destiny for the rest of our life. This study can show us that there can be both stability and change in attachment across the lifespan. And I think that that's really important, because isn't that so much of what we talk about here? Our experiences matter. Maybe somewhere along the way you learned people leave. Maybe you learned my needs are too much, or that closeness isn't safe, or that conflict means disconnection. Or maybe you were the one that learned I have to chase love, or I have to earn love. Or for you, it was I have to take care of myself because no one else will. Or something along the lines of I have to monitor everyone around me to know whether I'm okay. And those strategies may have made some sense somewhere along the way, but they don't necessarily have to determine how you connect the rest of your life with those that you love the most. And this is where I want to bring in secure attachment into the conversation just a little bit more before we wrap up. because secure attachment doesn't mean I never get triggered, I never need reassurance, and I never need support or space. My husband and I never have conflict. You guys, that's not real life. Secure attachment gives us more flexibility around connection, though. It's this sense of I can move towards you and still be myself. I can need you without believing I can't be okay without you. I can need space without completely disconnecting from you. Or I can tolerate some uncertainty without immediately assuming our relationship is in danger. And maybe one of the biggest ones is we can have a rupture and find our way back together. So for someone like David, moving towards greater security doesn't necessarily mean he never wants reassurance again. Maybe it means he can notice that desire for reassurance without automatically interpreting my need for space as rejection from him. And for someone like me, it doesn't mean I suddenly never need space, but maybe greater security means I can take the space I need while staying connected. Maybe I can say, I need a little more time, but I'm coming back in 10 minutes. You guys, that's different. We are not trying to erase the parts of ourselves that want closeness or autonomy, but we are working to increase our capacity for both. And over time, maybe our relationships begin giving us different experiences. Maybe our relationships can start to be like space and connection. There's room for both needs and boundaries. Maybe you can start to feel more independence and support, and that there can be conflict and then repair, and maybe closeness without losing ourselves. And those experiences can begin to give us something different to notice. Maybe space doesn't always mean abandonment. Maybe closeness doesn't always mean losing myself. Maybe someone's disappointment doesn't automatically mean that I've lost their love. And maybe I can still need someone and I can still be okay. That's the hope I want you to hear in this. Your attachment patterns can help you understand what you've learned about relationships and connection. But you guys, they don't have to become another label that tells you who you are, or that means this is who you are always going to be, okay? So learning that David tends towards anxious attachment strategies and I tend towards avoidance strategies, this hasn't given us another set of labels we throw at each other. But you guys, it has given us language. And maybe even more importantly, it's given us a lot of curiosity. So instead of only seeing now, like, why does he keep coming toward me? Or why doesn't he want me to have a break? I can become curious, what might be underneath his reaching for me? And instead of David only seeing, why is she pulling away? There can be curiosity about what my system is trying to accomplish by creating space. Because when we only see the behavior, it's really easy to take it personally. And I get that because we did that for so much of our relationship. But when we can start to understand the protection underneath it, compassion, you guys, can become a little bit more easy to access. And again, one more time, compassion doesn't mean abandoning ourselves. It means we understand more of the story. So maybe today I want to leave you guys with a few questions, okay? And I can put them in the show notes as well. When connection feels uncertain, what do I tend to do? I want you guys to really think about that one for a moment. When connection feels uncertain, what do I tend to do? Do I move closer when the connection feels uncertain? Do I pull away? Do I try to fix it all? Do I shut down? Do I seek reassurance? Or do I abandon my own needs to maintain connection? And then what might that strategy be trying to protect? What does it believe would happen if I didn't do that? That's a really big one because our protective strategies, again, are trying to keep us safe the best way they know how. So as we really sit with this and try to check in, we can see what maybe some of our own internal fears are. And finally, what would one small new experience look like? Not completely changing our attachment style today or in a few days or in a year, not becoming perfectly secure, just one different experience. Maybe it's I can need space and communicate that I am coming back. Or for you, it's I can want reassurance and pause long enough to notice what's happening inside me first. Or maybe it's I can stay present in conflict a little longer, or I can ask directly for what I need. And a really big one, maybe I can experience a rupture and then experience repair in a healthy way that brings me closer to my partner. And you guys, final remembrance, secure attachment isn't about never becoming activated. Maybe part of greater security is learning I can experience activation and still remain connected to myself. I can have needs and still be loved. I can give someone space without automatically assuming I'm being abandoned. Or I can ask for space without completely disappearing. Or I can experience conflict without believing connection is over. And I can repair and I can come back. And one more thing, maybe you learned that love required chasing, or that needing people wasn't safe, or that being independent was the most important thing for survival. But whatever you learned, you don't have to hate that part of yourself either. It may have been trying to help you stay connected in the best way it knew how. And if you're listening to this and thinking, but I've already worked on this, I've already done all these things, I understand more of my triggers, so why am I still doing this? If you are asking yourself these questions, why do I still panic when someone I love seems distant? Or why do I still people please when I'm afraid someone might be disappointed in me? Or why do I try to control everything when connection feels uncertain? I want you, as you think about that, I want you to know that all of these things have at some point been forms of protection. And this is where I want you all to remember that knowing more and experiencing something new are not always the same thing. Your insight matters, and understanding your attachment style matters. Understanding your story and what you've been through matters. But what if the next part of your healing isn't just another explanation? Maybe it's just giving yourself new experiences over and over. Maybe it's an experience of staying present when you normally disappear, or asking for what you need instead of hoping someone figures it out. Does that make sense? Oftentimes, it's being able to sit and say and reflect, wow, this was really hard, but look, we are still okay. And if you're a mom listening to this, there's another beautiful layer here, because every time you practice something different, you're not only changing the way you show up in your own relationships. You guys, your children are learning what relationships can look like too. They're learning that people can disagree and repair. They're learning that mom can have a need without apologizing for having one. They're learning that someone can need space and still come back, and that love doesn't require us to abandon ourselves. And that might be some of the most powerful cycle-breaking work that we ever do. It's not giving our children a childhood without rupture, but it is helping them experience relationships where repair is possible. Because this is what becoming a NeuroHeir means to me. We don't get to choose everything our nervous system has learned and inherited, but we get to participate in what happens next. We get to notice, we get to name, we get to nurture, we get to navigate just one experience and one interaction at a time. Because David's strategy might say, come closer so I know we're okay. And mine might say, give me space so I know we're okay. But underneath both, we're two human beings who want to know, are we safe here? Can I be myself and still belong? Can we find our way back to each other? And I believe that's one of the greatest gifts of understanding our attachment patterns. They don't have to become another label telling us who they are or who we are. They can become a doorway into understanding what we've learned, what we've protected, and what we might be ready to experience differently. So until next time, my friends, be gentle with yourself. Stay curious about what your system is trying to protect and how it's showing up. And remember, your patterns do not have to decide where you go next. I believe in all of you. I believe in the work that you're doing and the conversations. So please reach out if you have more questions. I love those. You can reach out on Instagram at Aligning with Leanna, and really look forward to hearing from you guys and your feedback. And so until next time, make it a beautiful rest of your week. Find moments of repair after rupture. Find moments of self-compassion over self-criticism. And really take some time to contemplate on some of these questions today. So until next time, bye guys. Thanks for joining me on the NeuroHeir Podcast. This work is about honoring resilience in yourself and also those who came before you, all while finding freedom from what was never yours to carry. With the help of stories, science, somatic tools, and the 4 N's, notice, name, nurture, and navigate, you have a path toward deeper connection with yourself, your loved ones, and the legacy you want to pass on. If today's episode spoke to you, share it with someone who's ready to step into this work too. And follow the show so you never miss an episode. Remember, you may not have chosen what you inherited, but you can choose what comes next.